I'm next going to ask Ismail Mahomed to give us his remarks. Ismail is the CEO of the Market Theatre Foundation. Before then, he had, I think, an 8-year stint in Grahamstown as artistic director of the festival down there, my hometown. Ran away as the tap started running dry in Grahamstown. But it's fantastic to have him here in Johannesburg. He's played in the arts sector just so many different roles as a playwright, involved in cultural exchange programs for the US consulate. As an arts administrator, he's done a hell of a lot for this country. And really, I think we are also delighted and blessed to have him this evening, part of this conversation. Can we please welcome him into this space?
Thank you very much. I'm hoping that I'm able to speak to the young people because this is a special year for you. It's celebration of 40 years of the 76 uprising. So I'd like to start off with 76, that it was an incredible year in the making of our country. It was the year when Soweto went up in flames. It was the year when the world's attention was focused on black students in the streets protesting against apartheid. And while our streets were burning with anger, there was still hope. We were not in vain. And then again, 1976 was the year where communication channels changed significantly in our country. It was the year when television was introduced, but a medium that was controlled immensely by the state. 1976 was also the year when the Group Areas Act still reigned and that apartheid laws prevented black and white actors from performing on the same stage without a permit. It also prevented black and white audiences from being in the same auditorium, and yet in that very same year, one of our most iconic institutions, the Market Theatre, opened its doors to all actors and to all artists. Now, here we are 40 years later into what we call a new democracy or a constitutional democracy, and once again, we find that our streets are filled with students protesting. Once again, we see that we're fighting against the television broadcaster. And once again, we're fighting in our theaters for access, whether that access, this time not denied by legislation, but a fight because funding does not allow everyone to have access to it. We're also looking at how our institutions continue to address issues of representation within our institutions, whether that is through our performances or through our exhibitions and so forth. Now, for me, the important question is that, do we sit back and reflect on the past in terms of what culture has done for us, or do we ask the pertinent question that the struggle continues? The very same struggles that we had then continue in different ways even today. I'd like to go back to 1985, and most of you again are a post-94 generation. So some of us may remember this, that it was the years when we had the state of emergency, the 85, 86 years, with an enormous amount of repression. It was the years when white parents thought that their boys are on the border. Meanwhile, they were in the townships. And here what we have in 2016 is again very often some white parents who think their boys are in security guards, but who are actually fighting students once again in private security armies deployed on our campuses. We looked at the kind of theater we created then, and what we're looking at now is work by Dr. John Carney's Missing, Mike van Graan's, Sylvia Vollenhoven's The Keeper of the Kum, and I can continue to name a lot more, Aubrey Sigabi's Marikana. And we need to ask questions about just how much has changed. Now, I think if we try to address things in that particular way, it paints an entirely gloomy picture that the struggle still continues, things have not changed, and so forth. And I think we'd be foolish to deny that our cultural spaces have changed, that our society has changed, our country has changed significantly. We may talk about, yes, the doors of freedom or the doors of learning and culture have been opened. The question we need to ask is, have the gates that surround those doors been opened wide enough to allow everyone in to reach those doors? I still think that we have a system of enormous amount of gatekeeping. And that is not necessarily legislated, but it is driven by individuals or by systems that we create ourselves. We'd also be foolish not to acknowledge now that we have more power than ever before. What we didn't have before was Section 16 in our Constitution, which guaranteed us freedom of expression, freedom of creativity, freedom of association, and so forth, which we now have. The question we need to ask is just how do we exercise that? Those particular freedoms don't come unlimited. They do come with the 3 R's, which are responsibility, risks, and repercussions. And I think we constantly need to engage with how we exercise those particular freedoms. We are definitely a country of complexities. We find ourselves 21 years into a constitutional democracy where once again we're engaging with some of the very complex issues of identity, not necessarily race, as in the way we've engaged in 76, in the 80s, and probably even in the 90s, but the subtext of those conversations remain very, very much the same. I'm going to just jump a little bit. I'm going to say that for me, I see the arts very much as a representation of our grandmothers. That they carry the stories, they carry the legacies, they carry our pain. But like our grandmothers, they give us the freedom to fly. And that they liberate us. They don't anchor us to a particular time in a particular moment. For me, art becomes incredibly oppressive when it anchors us just to a particular moment and that we stay stuck in memory. Art has to be both about reflecting on memory, but it also has to be about envisioning a future. But more importantly, it has to be about how we engage with the context in which we live in this very moment. As arts managers, what kind of a responsibility we have? I think we constantly need to engage with how we transform our spaces, not just in terms of content, but also in terms of how we open up those spaces, in terms of, do we still maintain the same times? You open at 8 and you close at 4. Are we taking into consideration that our societies are changing, and therefore the way in which our institutions operate in terms of access also need to change? Are we making information available in multiple languages? And apart from just the black-white South African issues, are we taking into consideration that ours is a society that has become much more complex with diaspora issues as well, and that we haven't yet got into engaging with much of that? We also need to ask questions about just how great or to what extent are we allowing schools to become part of our institutions, not just only in terms of coming to see, take away, and so forth, but also being able to write what happens on our stages and what gets exhibited on our walls. Young people are making their own history, and that history needs to be reflected in our theaters and our galleries and our museum spaces as well. Now, 40 years ago, to go back to 1976, where I said we lived in a country of deprivation, we lived in a country of denial, we lived in a country of no access. I know much of that pain because I wanted to study the arts. And while I was accepted at a university, I was denied a ministerial permit, the race-based ministerial permit, which did not give me access. And then here I stand 40 years later, not having had access to a formal arts education, but having been able to run one of the most celebrated arts festivals on this continent, and then continue to run the Market Theatre, a most iconic institution for the arts in our country. For me, the issues are clear. We have become a country of opportunity. We have become a country of possibility. If I look at that very institution in which I now work, and I've said the story to Dr. John Carney this weekend, is that before the market theatre became the theatre that it was a fruit and vegetable market. My grandfather was a fruit and vegetable vendor. My father transported fruit and vegetables from that building. And here their grandson now stands in that very building, not trading in fruit and vegetables, but trading in creativity and ideas. How then can I not acknowledge that we have not made major strides in the arts in our country? But I dare not become complacent, because whilst I may have had access and been able to rise to the top, I still continually engage with artists who do not have access. I continue to engage with artists who need to find ways to tell their stories. I need to engage with artists who need to find access to funding. And I need to challenge bureaucracies and administrators who remain the gatekeepers. We're not fighting an apartheid system, we're fighting a system that we have created. I watch politicians playing circus, whilst outside I watch voters fighting statues. That for me is complex. It's a major challenge, and it simply means that the struggle continues, and as artists we still have a hell of a lot of work to do.